Welcome, everyone. The way this is going to work is we have four wonderful speakers here tonight, and we're going to kind of introduce everyone. Everyone's going to have a chance to kind of talk about their experience within the energy field, especially solar energy and other sustainability factors. Then we are going to open to a question and answer period, and so you'll have the chance to put questions into the chat box. We're not enabling people to unmute themselves, so just put your questions in the chat box and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So if you have questions that come up while panelists are speaking, feel free to type those in and I will be moderating those this evening. So I really look forward to hearing everyone speak. We have some really cool people who are going to be coming up and talking about their experiences. But first, we're going to have Melissa kind of introduce our University of Dayton RE-volv team, who is hosting this event, kind of what we do on campus. So take it away, Melissa.
Thank you, Emily. So as a lot of you know, RE-volv is a national nonprofit, but here at UD, we have our own chapter, and we basically get in contact with other nonprofits to help them go solar. And we've had 2 successful projects so far. One with Mission of Mary back when Tess was project lead, and then one with East End Community Services. And right now we have about 3 leads and bills from them. So we're super excited about that for in the future. But if you guys want to hear more about what we do, this is our Instagram and Facebook information. And then if you have further questions, there is also our email. So like Emily said, we have 4 speakers tonight. First, we have Katie Van Horn. She's the Distributed Energy Resources and Grid Strategy Consultant, wow, it's a mouthful, at ICF. And then Theresa Isemann, who also works at ICF as an account manager. Then we have Justen Ehren, a project engineer at Melink, and Emily Skill, a development manager at Enel Green Power. I believe I'm saying that right. Let's hope so. So I'll have Emily introduce Katie for us.
All right, so our first speaker tonight, as Melissa said, is Katie Van Horn. After graduating with a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Dayton, Katie Van Horn pursued her passion of enabling clean energy adoption in difficult markets. Currently holding the position of Distributed Energy Resources and Grid Strategy Consultant at ICF, Katie works with utilities across the US to create and implement renewable energy promoting policy and programs. Not only focused on promoting renewable energy at work, Katie also helped establish Ohio's first Women in Clean Energy conference. Please join me in welcoming Katie as she shares her experience at ICF.
Thank you, Emily. You made me sound much cooler than I feel. Thanks again. So like most everyone here, I graduated from UD with a degree in mechanical engineering in 2018. As Emily stated, I, for a long time at this point, have had a really a passion for clean energy. So I started off by participating in internships, mostly surrounding energy efficiency, and then realized after my internships that I really wanted to pivot towards the world of renewables. So right after that, I got started with a company called IGS Energy in Columbus, Ohio, where I had another absurdly long title, which was Distributed Energy Resource Structuring Analyst, which basically just meant I created models to determine the customer value of solar, battery storage, energy efficiency products, etc. Anything clean energy I would touch, and I would model that customer values so that we could both enter new markets across the US as well as structure some new products for customers looking to adopt clean energy in one way, shape, or form. However, about a year ago, I ended up making a pivot to my current role, which we normally simplified to Distributed Grid Strategy Consultant, but it's not always very clear what that means. But it's basically just a fancy term for saying that I help utilities and government agencies figure out how to deploy renewable energy, including solar, in a way that's going to protect the safety and reliability of the grid, as well as protect the costs for customers on the grid as well. So if you want to go to the next slide, not everybody has heard of ICF, but if I do say so myself, it's a pretty cool place to work. So we are based in Washington, D.C., but I am based in New York City, as is most of my team, but my team has members really around the world. We have over 7,000 employees, and we work across a variety of different industries. So I work mostly within energy, but I also have touch points with our environment and our transportation groups as well. And then we do work in technology and cybersecurity and healthcare as well. If you haven't heard of ICF before, I highly recommend looking them up online because they have done some really incredible things. And during my orientation, I was very overwhelmed by everything they've done. It's a really cool company. But if you want to go to the next slide, I again work within our energy division, and within our energy division, we have a lot of cool capabilities spanning all the way from power markets to climate and resiliency, transportation, et cetera. And I, again, work on the distributed grid strategy team, which if you go to the next slide, I'll describe a little bit more what that means. So I alluded to this before, but essentially my team sits at, we kind of sit at the forefront of all of the evolving market changes in energy. So whether it be market evolution, you know, there's been a lot of changes in the way that electricity markets are structured, whether it be a regulatory sort of mandate or policy push for decarbonization or electrification, or more of a policy focus within a jurisdiction on climate vulnerability, or anything really that could trigger a change within an energy market. We will be there to create strategy around it. We'll be there to make it make sense and provide sort of next steps and a roadmap for how utilities and governments can proceed in order to make these big goals happen or to accommodate for new changes. So specifically, we'll work on these blue highlighted areas in the middle. We will do strategic planning for utilities. So that includes developing potential programs that a utility might want to investigate in order to deploy more solar within their region. It could include technical and economic analysis of the way that these solar systems are going to interact with the grid once they're deployed, as well as what that value will look like for the utility, for customers, making sure that as you're deploying these assets, it's not going to negatively affect anyone in a vulnerable community, that it's not going to compromise anyone's safety, et cetera. But really also working to push for market mechanisms that make clean energy more attainable for people, while keeping those other factors in mind. So if you go to the next slide, we do this for a lot of different clients. I work mostly in North America, but we really work across the globe in Europe, again, Canada, the United States. And our clients vary from the DOE to all of these utilities you see listed up on the screen. It's a pretty niche client base with the utilities that we work with. But we also work with some of the regional transmission organizations and whatnot as well. Basically, anyone who has skin in the game with regards to the grid and the way it interacts with solar, battery storage, or another distributed energy resource, we'll work with those clients to help them figure out how to get their goals done. So to tie it back to something more tangible, if you want to go to the next slide, I have a few examples of some of the projects that I've worked on since I started at ICF. So I have worked with the joint utilities of New York, which is essentially just the 6 utilities in New York, to help them implement New York's clean energy policy initiatives, really spanning every aspect of clean energy, including solar, energy storage, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, you name it. I've gotten the really cool opportunity to work with some utilities on their wildfire mitigation plans. So creating the strategy on how you can really mitigate the impacts of wildfires in wildfire regions for customers. Have worked with some folks in Ontario on forecasting renewable energy adoption and then helping them create strategy around the policies that they're going to create to facilitate that renewables adoption. And then I've worked with some closer to home utilities like Duke Energy, and we've helped them facilitate a lot of their stakeholder sessions as well, working with solar developers as well as customers, et cetera, to really make sure that as they're coming up with new programs and processes to facilitate the adoption of renewable energy, they're doing so in a way that's beneficial for all the parties involved. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg, but a few examples of some of the things I work on. And yeah, excited to be here. Very passionate about renewable energy, and yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Katie. That was really great to hear about all your experience and different projects you're working on. Our next speaker earned her Bachelor's of Mechanical Engineering and a Master's in Renewable and Clean Energy from the University of Dayton. Theresa Isemann has a wide range of experience in the sustainability field, from nonprofit work to corporate consulting. While researching the carbon sink potential of urban farms for her master's degree, Tess worked as a graduate assistant leading the Hanley Sustainability Institute Campus Energy Team. Without further ado, here's Theresa Isemann to speak about aspects of solar energy that have held her interest throughout her career.
Thanks, Emily. Let's go ahead and jump into it. So here's a brief overview of my career thus far. As Emily referenced, the 2 degrees from the University of Dayton. I'll talk a little bit more about what I was involved with when I was a student, understanding that there might be a higher volume of students on this call. Then I'll transition into how I started working for Tesla for a brief period of my life, and then come to tell you about my experience with ICF thus far. I will say I'm at an interesting position in my career right now, in that I just started working for ICF 3 weeks ago. So I'm very grateful that Katie gave you such a great overview as someone who had been there a little bit longer than me. So I am going to focus more on some educational aspects and professional aspects that I've learned about the solar field thus far. Thank you. So as I mentioned, as I was in UD, I had a lot of great experiences that really built up the framework for having a foundation in the renewables field. It starts as early as being involved with IAC, the Institute of Applied Creativity for Transformation. My experiences with them and their collaboration accelerator really taught me the power of disruptive thinking and how to introduce new disruptive metrics into maybe some more traditional models. And then working as a GA for UD's Hanley Sustainability Institute, along with Jack Reese, was a really enriching experience in project management. As Emily and Melissa referenced earlier, I was a co-lead for the Missionary Cooperative. I will say Colin Jern was the other co-lead. Could not have done that project without him or the team. We did successfully crowdfund money for Missionary Cooperative, fantastic urban farm in the Dayton community, to have an 11.5 kilowatt solar system on their roof. And then the last experience I'll touch on is the EDF Climate Corps program, which anyone who is a graduate student is eligible to apply for. They essentially partner graduate students with host organizations to work on projects. And I was fortunate enough to be partnered with a network of community colleges, and I did work regarding their sustainability and energy strategy, their financial evaluation and planning, and creating goals and targets for them to hit with their clean and renewable energy goals. Next slide, please. Thank you. After I graduated, I moved out to Las Vegas and accepted a position with Tesla as an energy systems designer. What this means is that day to day, I was designing residential solar systems for residential customers. Justen, I believe, is going to give you a fantastic overview of the construction and some of the more technical aspects. So rather than talk about that, I'm actually going to talk about one of the coolest things of being at Tesla for me, which was the company culture and being surrounded with people with similar motivations to be there. Working there was just fast-paced and fun and stressful at times, but really the urgency stemmed from the common motivation from everyone, understanding that the rate that we've reached, the 417.5 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, is extremely concerning. This is what the IPCC and other scientific reports are pointing toward. So this was in the back of our mind every day as we work. And I wanted to just take a quick minute to reflect why, again, we look to solar and some other renewables as partial replacement technologies for our energy grid. This graphic is a little old. It's from 2012, which is already almost 9 years ago. But I just wanted to point out the scale of which their life cycle carbon is on. So photovoltaics being at 40 grams of carbon equivalent for a life cycle carbon expenditure versus 1,000 grams of CO2 equivalent. And whether or not those units mean anything to you, you can grab the enormity of the scale that's on. And again, it was likely to be even better. I think might be down to 26 grams of carbon dioxide with the last study that I read. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight from this graph was just where the carbon emissions come from, with solar being more heavy on upstream processes, and coal, for example, being their operational processes expending the most greenhouse gas emissions, obviously being a fossil fuel and the fuel combustion causing those. So just to touch on how PV has come so far in such a relatively short amount of time, 10 to 20 years, we've overcome a lot of externality barriers in the government, residential industry, utilities. Technically, I won't speak to all of them, but I will say when doing residential design, there's a lot of motivation for energy security, especially after things like what happened in the ERCOT grid with the winter storms. People are wanting reliable sources of energy, and sometimes that can come in the form of solar plus battery storage. Also, motivations that we're seeing are investors wanting a sure, sound ROI on their investments, which is a really interesting, cool way of looking at your solar system. Next slide, please. So again, as of 3 weeks ago, I began working for ICF. I'm working in their DSM program implementation portion of their energy, environment, and infrastructure group. And what I'm going to be doing day to day is managing the retrofit rebate and the limited income rebate programs that NV Energy offers to their customers. So when you see things, I remember back in Dayton, sometimes DP&L would have the free LED light bulbs, or they would have $500 off a new AC unit that is higher efficiency. Those will be the types of programs we're running. Since I will be getting involved in the limited income program, though I can't speak much about my day-to-day, I thought this was an awesome opportunity just to remind everyone and touch base on the concept of energy justice, which I can't speak a lot to in the next couple minutes, but I really just want to give a high-level overview and just a reminder that for a lot, as much as 10 to 40% of some people's net income can be spent on utilities. I actually just read a study yesterday that it could be someone who brings in a household income of $18,000 might be spending $1,800 of it on utilities, compared to the $2,200 that a household bringing in $72,000 is. which is a difference between 16.5% and 3.5% of your income. So that's the type of energy burden that I'm speaking to here. And there's a lot of reasons for why this is happening. And one of the reasons that I'm about to dive deep into, hopefully in my position, is addressing the split incentive issue, which is a phenomenon that occurs when we look toward rental housing, which a lot of people who are in more vulnerable populations might be looking to for affordable housing. Landlords and property managers don't necessarily have a financial incentive to invest in energy efficiency upgrades, especially the more expensive ones, because they're not the ones paying the bills. But then these customers aren't able to foot the capital expense themselves either. So we can start addressing these issues with incentives programs, collaborating with rental properties, and this extends to solar as well, because when we talk about all these awesome benefits from going renewable or going solar, we leave out a large part of the population who may not be able to afford them, but have historically and continue to face more of the burden that these carbon intensive fuels provide or cause in the community. So that is what I'm hoping to do. And I just encourage everyone to read, watch, and learn more about energy injustice, energy justice. And someone that spoke a lot to it that I've been reading a lot more of is Dr. Robert Bullard. He's in the environmental justice space, but I just wanted to offer him as a starting point resource for anyone interested in learning more about this subject. So happy to explore this more in my new role at ICF.
Thank you so much, Tess. It's a really important point you brought up about energy justice. It's something we all have to kind of take into consideration, especially those of us moving forward in the energy field. All right, our next panelist is Justen Ehren, working as a project engineer at the Cincinnati-based company Melink. Justen Ehren also graduated from the University of Dayton with a bachelor's of mechanical engineering and a master's in renewable and clean energy. With an interest in data analytics and machine learning, Justen has been able to use his technical knowledge to develop renewable energy solutions, primarily in the commercial sector. Let's welcome Justen as he goes over the engineering behind solar projects and touches on the projects completed here at UD.
All right, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate you giving me the invite to discuss here. As you mentioned, I am a project engineer for Melink Solar and Geo. I went to UD, as was mentioned, as both a mechanical engineer, and then transitioned to the renewable and clean energy program there at UD. However, now I actually find myself doing a lot more electrical engineering. So I'll kind of get into a little bit of what I do on day-to-day, and then we at Melink actually designed and constructed multiple of the arrays that you might see around campus, including this one here on the screen at the Research Institute. You can go on to the next slide. So to give a little bit of background into what we at Melink do, ultimately we have 5 different businesses which all have one energy mission to improve energy efficiency, utilize renewable energy solutions to make the world a greener, cleaner place. So I won't get into all of our different divisions, but I encourage you to go check them out, see all the different products that we have to encourage energy efficiency, to spread renewable energy. I am only in the Melink Solar division, and as mentioned, we focus mostly on commercial energy systems, all kinds of ground mount, roof mount solar array systems with battery storage as well. So I will get into and dive into a little bit about the different projects that we've done for UD. So there's actually 3 main ones that we have participated in, designed, and constructed for UD. The main one being the 850 kW single axis tracker, which is at the Research Institute building. So if you are just on campus, I encourage you to at least make your way over there to check it out. It is a pretty cool system and definitely pretty unique looking, with some of the different row lengths that were needed to engineer the system. The other one I'll get into a little bit is the ballasted roof mount, which is on top of Fitz Hall. That one is a little over 400 kilowatt DC and produces just under 500,000 kWh per year. And then the final one, which was most recently constructed on top of the Adele Center, is a mechanically attached roof mount system, which all of these are recently built for the university. And I wasn't directly involved with their construction because I was still in school, but I've had the chance to do maintenance and commissioning on them since then, taking trips to check out the different systems. So I'll go into a little bit of, since my role for Melink has been primarily engineering the different systems, doing a lot of the electrical engineering for projects, doing a lot of the design and layout for the development of new projects. I'll kind of go through the process of what we typically do on a normal project. And ultimately, the first step that we ultimately go through is coming up with the design size and what kind of production that we're looking to get out of the system. And there are a couple of variables which ultimately determine what kind of size we go with. Oftentimes it might have to do with what kind of space we have available, how much roof space, how much ground space there is that we can utilize for our array. But also sometimes we often have to analyze how much energy the customer uses to make sure that sometimes our arrays do not overproduce relative to the customer's usage. And a lot of this is dependent on what kind of a tilt angle the system has, what type of azimuth angle, which is its angle relative to due south, and also the location that it's in. So what kind of weather, what kind of irradiance the sun is producing for that specific location that the array will be in. And from there, we have to kind of go through the process of evaluating what site constraints are present for that site. Are there power lines going overhead? Are there water lines going underground that we need to be aware of? Is there shading from trees that we should account for? And is there slopes in the terrain or grade change that we kind of need to be aware of so that the racking is able to adhere to the constraints there at the site? So that's kind of the process for laying it out. And then when it comes to the electrical design, there's a number of different factors and equipment that we go through to size. The inverter sizing's one of the more important ones. The inverter is, for those that don't know, it's what converts the DC energy generated from the solar panels to AC. We go through, and depending on the size of the inverter, determine the number of modules per string, which all the modules are strung together, and that way the voltage is added up for those modules, and determining how many modules are on each string, and then how many strings go to each inverter, depending on the size. And then there's also the wire sizing, conduit sizing, making sure that the conductors that we're using to send the power to the grid back to the building is rated for what the system would produce. And then finally, there's a number of different equipment that we go through and utilize for the systems. The DC combiners to bring kind of the DC string wiring together, the AC combiners to take the multiple inverter outputs and combine them to reduce the amount of wiring on the AC side. For large projects, we sometimes have like a PV main distribution panel, which combines multiple AC combiners. And then transformers are often used to get our voltage to what we need to be at for the specific system, whether that be medium voltage interconnecting at the grid or stepping it down to a lower voltage like 12208 volt, so that we can interconnect at the building. So that was kind of the main steps that we go through for ground mounts and trackers like the one at UD. Another kind of one that we often looked at are ballasted roof mounts, like the one on top of Fitz. And there are just a couple other little variables that vary, one of which being the tilt angle and the row spacing. One of the main factors that is a little different is that because it's on a roof, we often use ballast blocks, kind of seen in that top right picture, to weigh down the system and make sure that it can withstand the wind loads that might be present at higher elevations. The weight load, we have to kind of evaluate the structural capability of the roof to make sure that the building itself can withstand the weight of the solar array on top of it. So that's one of the major factors. And one other way that you can mount the panels on the roof is with mechanical attachments, and that would be making penetrations in the roof to secure the modules to the roof so that they don't go anywhere. And that is a lighter option, but can often present some risk with penetrating the roof and additional measures like that. So the final array that we looked at was this pitched roof option, which is on top of the Enel Center. And again, it's fairly similar to the ballasted one on Fitz that we looked at. However, it is a slightly different racking system. It can't use the ballast blocks because it's at the tilt. Instead, we are forced to use the mechanical attachments to penetrate and secure the array to the roof. And we do that with this rail racking system typically. You can see kind of on the top right-hand corner, we have the flashing and then the rails that will run kind of east-west typically, which will end up being what the modules are mounted to specifically. So this is kind of an example, and we don't see too many of these because this is kind of definitely closer to more of a residential project, mounting it to the shingles itself. But again, we see plenty of pitched roof projects like this on standing seam roofs for commercial buildings, and oftentimes, and sometimes like this, as you see it on the Enel Center here. So the last thing I was going to go through is just to give a little demonstration. I provide some pictures here of kind of the construction summary, what a project might look like from beginning to end, what kind of steps are taken out in the field when the array is being built, and ultimately where it starts is mobilization, getting the team on site there, and surveying to determine where exactly equipment's going to go, where posts are going to be driven into the ground, where the rows are going to be laid out, and sometimes where a fence might be located around the array. After that, you can kind of see in the top right picture, you have the post pounded in the ground, and the purlins, which tracker here are running north-south. So that's kind of what the module will be mounted on. And then the pivot arm is what allows it for the tracker to rotate east-west. So one of the main advantages, which I hadn't explained earlier, is the tracker is when it's able to follow the sun throughout the day. So as it's rising in the east, it's kind of pointing east. And then as the sun sets in the west, it kind of follows the sun's path throughout the day to create more energy and generate more energy throughout the day than something that would just be fixed. So that's what kind of the racking system might look at. And then you get into more of the electrical installation, which you see on the top left and middle, in the middle center, or on the top middle. You can see kind of some of the string wiring coming along the purlins there, which run back to the inverters. And then you can see kind of the trenches that were dug to run the conductors back to wherever it's going. And we typically have a trench line like that, which will take all the conductors to the inverters, and then the inverters to the combiners, to the main distribution panel, to the transformers, as kind of seen there. And then that bottom picture kind of shows more of what it'll look like as the end product. You can see the drive tube is installed there, which is connected to the motor, which ultimately turns and tilts that array throughout the course of the day. And then the final step would be commissioning the array, testing its voltage and current output to make sure that all the modules are acting as intended and creating the output that we're looking for, and ultimately getting the production that we are looking for. So that was all I had. Just giving a little summary about some of the design process we go through, what construction looks like. And so that's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you, Justin. There's a lot that goes into designing a solar system like that. So I appreciate you going through those steps.
Yeah.
All right, so our final panelist is Emily Skill. She graduated from the University of Dayton with a Bachelor's of Science in Geology, minors in SEE and Philosophy, and a certificate in GIS before going on to earn her Master's of Science in Environment and Society from Utah State University. During graduate school, Emily Skill had the opportunity to work as a funded research assistant on a 2-year Department of Defense grant in coordination with the Utah Office of Energy Development and the Utah Geologic Survey to create a public GIS map displaying wind and solar potential in Utah compatible with military operations. Her thesis focused on the process of 100% renewable energy resolutions by municipalities. Here's Emily Skill to talk about her experience working in the renewable energy field.
Thanks for the introduction, Emily. Hello, everyone. Thanks for bearing with us for the last speaker tonight. I hope I can keep your interest. I'll just talk a little bit about my path and how I got to where I am, and then about, kind of what I do in my current job, but I'll kind of discuss some other things along the way and if people are interested, I'm happy to answer more questions about certain topics I might touch on. So as Emily mentioned, I graduated from UD in 2017. I actually did 5 years at UD and then went on to Utah State University where I did my master's degree. I really enjoyed my master's program. If you're at all interested in pursuing a master's degree, definitely go for it. I think UD was amazing, don't get me wrong, but I really enjoyed my master's program and thought it was like 2 of the best years of my life. I had a lot of fun. And then I worked for Enel Renewable Energy, which was a great experience. I worked in Salt Lake City, which was about an hour and a half south of where I went to school in Utah. And while I was there, I sort of got a taste of what it was like to be a renewable energy developer. And so I was there for just under a year and a half and was offered a position to work at Enel Green Power last summer. So I've been with Enel Green Power now since September of last year. And upon accepting that position, I actually moved out to Chicago. Actually, around the same time that Katie moved to New York, I moved to Chicago. I remember we were both presenting at the women's conference, I think the weekend that both of us were moving across the country. Next slide. So my master's thesis touched on a couple of things that I think might be relevant to the group here. So I studied how 3 cities in Utah adopted resolutions for 100% renewable electricity across their entire communities. So within their city production, as well as across the amount of power and electricity that the community is using as well. So I had 3 publications come out of this. The first you're seeing on the far left of the screen is more of a research-based framework that's supposed to help community members or city staff or city officials who are interested in bringing about a similar resolution or goal in their community. So this is a very friendly approach to learning some of the steps that I found in my research that were key to the success that these cities in Utah experienced. And then the other 2 publications are more recent, but again, kind of touch on what I learned throughout my master's research, which was how these 3 cities, reach their goals, or how they're working to reach their goals of 100% renewable electricity. So sort of what engagement strategies are they using with their communities, and what other ways are they working with their utility to reach those 100% goals? And also, generally speaking, how did they build that community support, especially in a state that's very coal-based, as well as almost always red in every election, very conservative? How are you able to, build about this idea and the support for renewable energy. So if you're interested in that, let me know. I can send you those papers for free. But if you're still a student, you should be able to access them for free through like Google Scholar or whatever you use. Next slide. So now I'll just skip on to what I do now. So now I work for Enel Green Power, which is a global company. It's actually an independent power producer and started over in Italy, but has been in North America now for about, it's been really popular for the last 10 years, but I think may have had its first project about 20 years ago. So Enel is slowly becoming a little bit more popular, but unless you're a part of the industry, you probably haven't heard of it. In North America, you can skip to the next slide and you can look a little bit more about the details as to what we can see here in the US. We have about 60 projects that are currently operating with a capacity of about 7.4 gigawatts in the United States. And you can look at the breakdown here, but based on solar, wind, and geothermal. The company right now has a sort of based out by region. So we have developers who do my job on the West Coast, a whole bunch of us who are in the central US. We have like a North Central team, a South Central team, focused more on the Dakotas as well as like the Texas group. And then we have our Midwest team, which is where I am now. And then we also have our East Coast team. So Enel is incredibly, it's expanding a lot. Our new goal is to try to produce 2 new gigawatts of renewable energy a year, which is aggressive. And for the last few years, the company's been producing about 1 gigawatt of new energy. But now we're trying to really bump up, what we're producing. And so if you're interested at all in any way working for Enel, we are hiring just about any type of role you could imagine. We work with people, or I work with people like Justen all the time, our project engineers who, are going in and doing all that design work. Those are key assets to our company, and we have a lot of roles like that. But if you go to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit more about so what I do. So my job's a little bit unique. So I'm a renewable energy development manager. And so what I do is I do all that preliminary work that happens before you can actually put those solar panels in the ground and construct the site. So I work with our team. We have a GIS team as well as a few other tools and software programs that we use to identify sort of the best locations for wind and solar projects. And then they spit out a whole bunch of locations where they're like, developers, go figure out if this is a good place for a solar project or for a wind project. And then we kind of get our boots on the ground and we start talking with people in the community. We do a really detailed sort of analysis to understand, what is the politics like in that area? What do the landowners think about renewables? Is this going to be a place where we can get the support that we need to have success in building this project here? So the next big thing is really, signing up land, whether that's purchasing land, which is a little less common with wind projects, but it is common in solar projects to own the land. But oftentimes we just lease the land from landowners all across the country. And so we'll need a substantial amount of land if we're doing a wind project. I understand the focus is solar today, so I'll keep my focus there. But with solar, you don't usually need as much land as you do with wind. And with solar, though, you do need to have landowners who are interested in allowing us to sort of have solar be the one use on that property. So it does take a little bit more convincing with solar sometimes to get them to, wean off agriculture or whatever it is they're currently using for the land. But so with my job, I'm working with those landowners. I'm getting them to negotiating terms with them for the lease price or for the purchase price. And then I'm also working with our engineers and our surveyors to go out there and do all the environmental work and all the surveying work that we have to have done on those properties. So we need to have a whole bunch of different environmental surveys and environmental studies completed before we can do any sort of construction. And then additionally, we have to work with the communities, whether that's the county or a local municipality, to get the permits we need to actually build a solar farm there. So I'm actually going through this process right now with some of the solar projects I'm developing here in Northern Illinois. I'm developing a portfolio of about 115 megawatts of solar across 5 different sites. And of those 5 sites, 4 of them are located in different municipalities. And so I have to go through the permitting process in each of those municipalities to get them to grant us a permit for the project. So this involves working very closely with our interconnection team, who works with the utility to allow us to interconnect the project to the grid. It involves working with the project engineers to make sure we have our site designs and our site plans that meet the ordinance and requirements of that specific municipality. And then it also involves working with our permitting specialists and environmental specialists who are working on all those different environmental studies that we have to have done. So what I do is I compile all these pieces together and present them in front of the municipality. I'm sort of the face of the project, where I give a 30-minute presentation in front of a board, and then we allow for public comment, as well as the city council or the board to question me and our project. And so I have to be able to respond about sort of what impacts is this project going to have on the community, what are the long-term benefits, and sort of try to sway them to get them to hopefully support the project and grant us our special use or conditional use permit for the project. And so the images here kind of like walk you through all those different things we have to have done. But if you skip to the next slide, one of the big things that makes a project successful is having someone who wants to buy the power. These are much larger projects, and so we don't build it until we have a power purchase agreement signed in most cases. And so Enel Green Power is a fairly large company. We work across the entire US, and so we have a lot of really great contracts with companies like Kellogg's and Anheuser-Busch, Facebook as well. And we're working with these companies and businesses, as well as universities and cities, to help them achieve their goals for 100% renewable electricity. So it kind of circles back to where I started with my master's research, but in a little bit of a different approach than I didn't necessarily see coming until a few years ago. Next slide. And then Justen did a great job kind of talking through the construction and operation, how you get to the construction of solar projects. Same way with large scale projects, it's just going to be on, a couple 100 or 1,000 acres rather than, on a rooftop, but similar approach. And, once the project's operational, we will have an operation and maintenance team kind of come out and regularly check the site. Maybe not day to day, but we do have a 24-hour control room that constantly monitors our sites to make sure they're functioning, efficiently. And if needed, we get our O&M people out there to address any concerns. But ideally, these projects last about 20 to 25 years. Of course, it sort of depends on how long that power purchase agreement is. If that power purchase agreement is only about 15 years, the site may only be operational for 15 years if no one else is buying the power after that. So that is sort of a constraint on the operation. But Enel, I really like working for Enel because we try to really close that loop when we talk about the waste stream. And so Enel has been partnering with Enel, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, as well as a few other organizations to try to identify the best ways to recycle panels and repurpose, even like wind blades and wind turbines as well. And additionally, one other cool thing that we do is we're trying to work on dual use solar. So planting native plants and prairie grasses underneath panels, as well as working with sheep farmers to bring sheep in to trim the grasses so we don't have to have any mowing done at the site. So Enel is actually sort of on the front lines of some of this newer research around how we can have solar projects that are dual use and able to sort of give back to the soil and give back to the environment, rather than just having it be, a dirt field underneath the panels. Next slide. I think that's the last one. Yeah, okay, perfect. That was everything. So thanks everyone, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Emily, that was great. So we have quite a few questions. Unfortunately, we are running a little short on time, so we'll try to get through as many as we can in the next couple minutes here. First question we got was for Katie from Adula, asking about you mentioning helping utilities deploy DER. So from your experience, how do the utility companies generally deal with DER and how it's disturbing the grid system?
Yeah, so I'd say utilities tend to be in one of two camps right now. Either they're proactively pursuing it and sort of pushing for programs that would facilitate that adoption, or they're sort of reactively trying to deal with it after the fact on the grid. So I'd say the biggest issues that utilities are facing and actively addressing on a whole are hosting capacity on the grid. So this is a huge topic within the utility industry of how we can perform analysis on the grid to make sure that solar is being deployed in places where they have the means to do so without making additional grid upgrades. And that's important because if you're having to make a lot of grid upgrades really swiftly, then that could lead to higher costs that could eventually be socialized with customers who may or may not be benefiting from distributed energy resources as much as the customers who are adopting them, which gets to Tessa's LMI point and another big area that utilities are focusing on and my group focuses on in particular, which is that cost allocation as a sort of a secondary thought, because as you're deploying DER, it could necessitate those grid upgrades that could, cause those extra costs, but also depending on the compensation that you're giving a customer who is producing solar power and putting it onto the grid. If you are overcompensating that, then that could cause another customer who may have a greater energy burden to have to sort of subsidize that with their energy bills. And so utilities, in addition to really paying attention to where solar can be deployed effectively and safely, are also having to pay attention to the cost effects of that as well. And then I'd say finally, the biggest initiative I've seen amongst utilities, amongst transmission organizations, amongst everyone is forecasting the future adoption of solar. And that sort of gets into that hosting capacity as well, how much solar the grid can handle without making those additional upgrades, because as utilities are anticipating growth in the solar field, they're really trying to make proactive decisions about, okay, do we continue to, allow solar to be deployed where we don't have to make those grid upgrades, or are there additional upgrades and modernizations that we need to make on the grid on a whole so that we can continue to deploy solar? Can we add battery storage so that we aren't injecting as much sort of unknown power onto the grid? And what are sort of the programs and the rates that we can form to incentivize this for customers? So it's really a balance. I think for utilities right now, the game is really, how can we anticipate solar growth? How can we communicate with developers where this would be beneficial on our grid, and how do we do the analysis to get to that point? And then finally, how do we accurately value from a financial standpoint what these solar systems are bringing to the grid, as well as the renewable benefits as well, depending on the jurisdiction. But really, I'd say those are the three biggest areas that utilities are working in right now with regards to DER deployment.
Awesome, thank you for that. So I think we're gonna have time for one more. I'm gonna kind of combine a few that we've gotten. This is open to all panelists. So this is a question. So what large scale project do you think the United States government should approve for construction? Or do you think that there's some other way that we could deploy solar more effectively to reach people? What's kind of one big thing you think needs to happen, whether solar or renewable energy in general, for it to become more widespread and adopted? It's kind of a big thing, but if just one thing could change or happen, what would that be?
I guess I could start. I'm gonna say it can't be one thing. I don't think there's a silver bullet to anything, but I do think it'd be very helpful to have policy that I would say really pushes for us to have a 100% renewable grid. And I think things like a renewable portfolio standard at the federal scale that's aggressive, maybe an 80% goal or something, would significantly help, as well as other policies such as perhaps a carbon tax or cap and trade system, or something that de-incentivizes coal and fossil fuel use, where we already are seeing a reduction in coal power because it's not cost efficient anymore, but natural gas is still being used. It's seen as sort of a power system that's tying renewables and coal, over to the next thing. I guess a bridge fuel is sort of what they're calling it. But if we really want to start seeing a push for renewables, I think it does kind of need to stem from policies. My work focused on initiatives that came out of local governments wanting to make a difference, and it has in Utah. And so I really do believe in seeing change through policies like that. But again, I don't think it's a one answer fits all here.
I would definitely echo the call for a federal renewable portfolio standard, or just even a recommendation for states. And it'll be different. Each states will look a little different how they address that, obviously, with geographic differences. From an engineering standpoint, one thing I'm looking forward to on the efficiency side is looking how to, this isn't necessarily renewables, but we need to address our cooling and heating. The way that we're heating and cooling our residential homes can be as much as 40% of your utility bill right now. There are a lot of really cool cooling technologies that are starting to go out, and people are exploring like evaporative cooling and all these other things. So we need to address that so that we can lower our energy consumption as a whole, which will make renewables more cost effective even more.
And I'd say finally, from a technical standpoint, what we're discussing the most in New York right now is making major transmission investments so that in the areas where large-scale renewables are being deployed, those aren't always, and most likely are not, the areas with the largest population, which is why this comes up so often in New York, because you've got the city down in its own little world, and then the rest of the state is big and open and can host a lot of renewables. The ocean is right there. It can host a lot of offshore wind, but really what's missing in that equation is the transmission infrastructure to get the power to where it needs to go. And so I think from my perspective, some of the conversations that I've heard, it seems like transmission and investment in more transmission and connecting the different portions of the transmission grid is going to be really crucial if we want to deploy large-scale renewables.
Yeah, I would just add one more thing, I guess, relating specifically more towards the commercial solar as opposed to utility scale. But since we kind of focus more on that commercial scale, we kind of see the best customers for solar are typically those that are going to be around in the next 25 years or so. And one of the bigger markets that we are attacking and going after is kind of the schools. Just because for schools, at least, they're going to be there for the next 25 years or so. If a school does get a roof replacement, if a new school is built, I think that's a good opportunity for an easy behind the meter project where you can easily offset that building's usage for that school. And as kind of roof replacements happen for more buildings, we can make it kind of more possible moving forward. So that was the one other area that I think would be an easy one to target.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. We just want to thank you from UD RE-volv so much for coming and talking to us. I know there were questions that we didn't get to, so I will send a follow-up email to the participants and give your contact information if everyone is comfortable with that. And obviously this is recorded, we'll post it to YouTube on the RE-volv page, but I could not imagine a more perfect mix of panelists with the variety of information, especially as a business major. I feel like I learned more in this hour than I have in some of my classes. So thank you guys so much for coming. I know I went 2 minutes over, I'm so sorry. But thank you and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone.